What if death is not the end? What if the boundary between the living and the dead is thinner than we believed? What if the dead are not gone at all? What if they are still here? Not as memories, not as symbols, but as unseen presences existing alongside us, watching, listening, waiting. And if that sounds impossible, consider a more unsettling question. How would you know if it were happening? Have you ever had a dream that felt different from an ordinary dream? A dream that seemed more vivid, more real? A dream that stayed with you long after you woke up? Have you ever had a sudden feeling that told you not to do something? A warning you couldn't explain? A strange intuition that later turned out to be right? Have you ever thought about someone moments before they called? Received an idea that seemed to arrive fully formed? Felt an impulse so powerful that it changed the direction of your life? Most people dismiss moments like these. Coincidence, psychology, pattern recognition, and perhaps they're right. But what if they're not? What if some experiences feel strange because something about them actually is? For more than a century and a half, one controversial book has carried a claim so extraordinary that it continues to inspire fascination, skepticism, and fierce debate. A claim that refused to disappear. A claim that spread across continents. A claim that built an entire movement around a single possibility. The possibility that the dead never truly leave. Most books are written by authors. This one claimed to be something else entirely. Published in France in 1857, it was presented not as fiction, not as mythology, not as a collection of ghost stories. It claimed to be a record of conversations, questions asked by the living, answers allegedly given by the dead, question by question, answer by answer, an attempt to investigate mysteries that have haunted humanity since the beginning of history. Death, the soul, consciousness, suffering, the purpose of life, and what, if anything, waits beyond the grave. The book was called The Spirit's Book, and according to the man whose name appeared on the cover, he was not its true author. He was the organizer, the compiler, the investigator, the one asking the questions. The answers, he claimed, came from the spirits. If those claims were false, then the Spirit's Book becomes a fascinating historical curiosity, a 19th century attempt to explain humanity's oldest fears. But if those claims were true, then something far stranger follows. Death has not silenced the dead. It has only hidden them. And that creates a question that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. If the dead are still here, where are they? And what are they doing? Tonight, the Black Archive opens Spirit File 1A, the book that claimed the dead are still here, the book that describes an invisible population existing alongside humanity, the book that attempted to map a reality beyond ordinary perception, and the book that asked the question few people are comfortable considering. What if some of the thoughts you call your own did not originate with you? Before the world knew him as Allan Kardec, he was Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivel, an educator, a scholar, a man associated with structure, discipline, and rational inquiry, which is precisely what makes this story unusual, because Kardec was not the mystery. He is the guide, the investigator who attempted to explore it, the man who claimed to collect testimony from voices beyond death and organize it into a coherent picture of reality. He did not present his work as blind faith. He presented it as investigation, comparison, classification, analysis, a systematic effort to gather claims and search for recurring patterns. Whether that effort succeeded remains a matter of debate, but as Kardec followed the implications of the answers he received, the mystery grew larger, because the spirits he described were not distant. They were not sealed away in another realm. According to the testimony he collected, they remained connected to the living world, observing, influencing, communicating, sometimes in ways so subtle that most people never noticed them. A sudden intuition, a reoccurring dream, an unexplained warning, a thought that seems to arrive from nowhere, a feeling that refuses to leave. Coincidence, psychology, or something else entirely. Because if unseen intelligences truly exist, the first question is not whether they are real. The first question is whether they have already touched your life. And if they have, would you even know it? To answer that question, Kardec began with a simpler one. What exactly are spirits? If the dead are still here, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What are they? Right now, not after death, not in another dimension, not somewhere beyond the stars. Right now. To answer that question, Kardec began with another one, a question that appears near the beginning of the Spirit book, a question that determines everything that follows. What exactly are spirits? According to the answers recorded in the text, spirits are not gods. They are not demons. They are not mythical creatures. They are not symbolic representations of human psychology. They are conscious beings, intelligent beings, the invisible population of creation. And that answer immediately changes the scale of the mystery, because the book is not describing a handful of wandering ghosts. It is describing an entire world, a civilization beyond sight, a population existing alongside humanity, an unseen society occupying a reality most people never perceive. If the book is correct, then humanity is not sharing reality with an empty universe. Humanity is sharing reality with an unseen population. Think about that for a moment. According to the Spirit book, you have never been alone. Not in your own home, not in your car, not while sleeping, not while grieving, not while celebrating, not while listening to this, not in the moments you believe nobody was watching. The unseen population described by the book is not somewhere else. It exists alongside you. If that sounds impossible, consider something simpler. Radio waves exist all around you. Cellular signals, Wi-Fi, information moving invisibly through the air, entire conversations passing through the room you're sitting in right now. Yet you experience none of them directly. Not because you aren't there, because you lack the ability to perceive them. Kardec believed the spirit world might operate in a similar way. Hidden, not absent, present, but normally beyond human perception. And if that's true, how much of reality exists beyond the limits of what you can see? The next question Kardec asks is even stranger. Which came first, the physical world or the spirit world? The answer is immediate. The spirit world came first. The physical world came later. In this system, physical reality is not the foundation of existence. It is a temporary layer, a stage, a classroom, a brief experience occurring inside something much larger. The visible world becomes secondary. The invisible world becomes primary. And if that is true, then death begins to look very differently. And then the book introduces something unexpected. something that makes the spirit world far less comforting than many people imagine. According to Kardec, not all spirits are wise. Not all spirits are enlightened. Not all spirits are truthful. Not all spirits are good. Many people assume that if consciousness survives death, it automatically becomes greater, more intelligent, more moral, more evolved. The book says otherwise. It claims death changes your condition, not necessarily your character, which means pride survives, manipulation survives, vanity survives, ignorance survives, deception survives. And suddenly the mystery becomes much darker, because now the question is no longer, can spirits communicate? The questions become, who is communicating? If an unknown number called your phone, would you want to know who was speaking? If someone knocked on your door in the middle of the night, would you want to know who was outside? Yet according to the Spirit's book, people spend their lives attempting communication with unseen intelligences without ever asking who is answering. According to the text, some spirits seek growth, some seek wisdom, some seek to help, others seek attention, others seek influence, others enjoy confusion, and some imitate wisdom they do not possess. Imagine receiving a message from an unseen intelligence. How would you know whether it was truthful? How would you verify its intentions? How would you know whether it was helping you or manipulating you? And that leads directly into one of the most disturbing ideas in the entire book. The claim that spirits may influence human beings far more often than people realize. Not through dramatic possessions, not through horror movie manifestations, not through objects flying across rooms. Something much quieter, much more subtle. Thoughts, impulses, suggestions, emotional pressure. Have you ever felt a sudden urge you couldn't explain? A powerful intuition that arrived without warning? A thought that seemed fully formed the moment it appeared? A feeling that refused to leave no matter how hard you ignored it? Most people call these experiences coincidence, instinct, psychology, and perhaps they're right. But the Spirit book proposes another possibility. What if some thoughts do not originate where you think they do? What if influence sometimes feels exactly like your own mind? What if the most effective voice would not sound foreign at all, but familiar? Because if an outside intelligence could influence your thoughts, how would you know which thought was yours? A dangerous thought would still feel like your thought. A comforting thought would still feel like your thought. A destructive impulse would still feel like your thought. The voice would not sound foreign. It would sound familiar. Because if it sounded foreign, you would reject it immediately. And that creates a disturbing possibility. The most effective influence would be the influence you'd mistake for yourself. And if that were true, how many of your decisions are really yours? How many of your fears? How many of your impulses? How many of your convictions? And if you cannot answer those questions, then the mystery is no longer out there. Then the mystery is inside your own mind. Because if influence can feel identical to your own thoughts, then the boundary between yourself and the unseen may be far less clear than it appears. And according to the Spirit's book, that relationship does not begin after death. It begins before it. Because the spirits described by Kardec were not merely observers. They were once human. They lived. They suffered. They loved. They feared. And eventually, they died. Which leads to the question every human being asks sooner or later. What actually happens when that moment arrives? What actually happens when consciousness leaves the body? According to the Spirit's book, the answer is far stranger than most people realize. the most important moment in your life has not happened yet. It is the moment you die. Because according to the answers recorded by Kardec, death does not end consciousness, it reveals it. And if that is true, then what happened next may be even stranger than most people imagine. Every culture has asked the question. Every religion has attempted to answer it. Every human being eventually confronts it. What happens when you die? The spirits described by Kardec were not mysterious beings that never lived. They were once human. They had families, dreams, ambitions, fears, regrets. They walked through the same things we do. They worried about the future. They loved people. They lost people. And eventually, they died. But according to the Spirit Book, death is not the moment consciousness ends. It is the moment consciousness discovers it was never in the body to begin with. The body remains. The consciousness continues. And according to the text, many spirits do not immediately realize what has happened. Think about that. Most people imagine death as a moment of instant understanding, a moment where every mystery is suddenly revealed. The Spirit's book describes something very different. Confusion, disorientation, uncertainty. Imagine opening your eyes. You can think, you can remember, you still feel like yourself, but something is wrong. People cannot hear you. You cannot touch them. The world feels familiar, yet distant. You try to speak, nothing changes. You try to reach someone, nothing happens. And slowly, a realization begins to form. You are still conscious, but your life is over. According to the text, some spirits awaken after death and struggle to understand their condition. They see, they think, they remember, they remain aware, yet something fundamental has changed. The body is gone, the consciousness remains. And suddenly a disturbing possibility appears. What if death is not the destruction of identity, but its exposure? Because according to the Spirit Book, death does not instantly make a person wise. It does not instantly make a person compassionate. It does not instantly make a person enlightened. It reveals what was already there. The fearful remain fearful. The selfish remain selfish. The compassionate remain compassionate. The curious remain curious. The person survives. If that is true, then death may not transform consciousness nearly as much as people imagine. It may simply remove the disguise. And that creates an uncomfortable question. Who are you when everything familiar is removed? Who are you when status disappears? When possessions disappear? When appearances disappear? When reputation disappears? When the body itself disappears? What remains? Most people spend their lives preparing for death. Very few spend their lives preparing for the possibility that they survive it. Those are not the same thing. The book suggests that the difficulty of this transition depends partly on the life that came before it. Some spirits recover quickly, others do not. Some adapt, others remain confused. Some accept their condition, others cling desperately to the life that they left behind. Why? According to Kardec's system, attachment. The more a person identifies exclusively with physical existence, the more difficulty they'll have separating themselves from their life before. The more a person believes that they are only the body, the harder it is to accept life without it. And suddenly the mystery becomes personal again, because this is not merely a question about death. It is a question about identity. What would be hardest for you to leave behind? Your family, your ambitions, your possessions, your unfinished goals, your regrets, the version of yourself you spent your entire life building? According to the Spirit book, the answer may determine how difficult the transition becomes. Because whatever survives is what you truly became, not what you claim to be, not what others believed you were, what you actually are. And that idea may explain why death appears so differently throughout the book. It is not described as a reward. It's not described as a punishment. It's described as a revelation. A revealing of character. A revealing of attachment. A revealing of consciousness itself. And if that is true, then perhaps the most important preparation for death is not learning what happens afterward. It's understanding what you are before it arrives. But Kardec's investigation did not stop there. Because if consciousness survives death, another mystery immediately appears. Why are some people born into suffering? Why are some people born into privilege? Why do some fears feel ancient? Why do some encounters feel strangely familiar? Why do some lives feel unfinished before they begin? According to the Spirit book, the answer is that this may not be your first life, and it may not be your last. Because the next doctrine Kardec investigated would have become one of the most controversial ideas in this entire movement: reincarnation. If you survived death, would you want to do this again? Another life? Another childhood? Another loss? Another heartbreak? Another funeral? Another death? According to the Spirit book, you already have. Because if consciousness survives death, another question immediately follows. Why come back? Why return at all? Why leave one life only to begin another? Why would consciousness repeatedly enter a world filled with suffering, loss, uncertainty, and death? According to the Spirit book, the answer is growth. Not punishment, not reward, growth. Across different circumstances, different families, different cultures, different eras. Imagine forgetting everything: your name, your family, your memories, your achievements, your failures, every lesson, every mistake, every victory, gone. And yet, according to the Spirit book, the person returns anyway, not remembering, but carrying the consequences. According to the book, a single lifetime is not enough. Not enough to learn, not enough to grow, not enough to fully develop. So the soul returns, again, and again, and again. Whether that claim is true is impossible to verify, but it attempted to solve one of humanity's oldest questions: why life appears so unequal, why suffering appears so unevenly distributed, why some people seem born into hardship while others seem born into opportunity. Why is one child born into safety while another is born into suffering? Why does one person seem surrounded by opportunity while another spends their entire life fighting to survive? Why do some people inherit comfort while others inherit pain? Those questions have haunted humanity for thousands of years. The Spirit book offered an answer. Not everyone accepted it. Many still don't. But the answer was simple. This is not the beginning of the story. It is the middle. According to Kardec's system, human beings are not born blank. They are born veiled. The soul forgets previous lives, but does not escape their consequences. And suddenly strange questions begin to appear. Why do certain fears become older than experience? Why do some places feel familiar despite never being visited? Why do some encounters feel immediate, as though two strangers somehow recognize one another? Why do certain moments feel less like discovery and more like remembrance? Coincidence? Psychology? Pattern recognition? Perhaps. But according to the Spirit book, there may be another explanation. A history you no longer remember. And that creates an unsettling possibility. What if the greatest event of your life is something you no longer remember? What if the person you are today is only one chapter in a story far older than you realize? What if your oldest memories are not actually your oldest memories? Whether true or not, the reason the Spirit book spread becomes easier to understand. People did not only want ghost stories, they wanted answers. Why do children die? Why do good people suffer? Why does death feel unnatural? Why does consciousness resist the idea of its own extinction? Why do human beings spend their entire lives searching for meaning? The book claimed those questions had answers, not emotional answers, systematic answers, an organized vision of reality, a universe where suffering was not random, a universe where death was not final, a universe where consciousness continued beyond physical existence. And that is why the book became more than a book. It became a movement, a philosophy, a lens through which millions of people would eventually view life, death, and existence itself. But after everything we've explored, the most interesting question is not whether Kardec was right. The most interesting question is why these ideas refuse to disappear. For more than a century and a half, people have continued asking the same questions, the same fears, the same mysteries, the same hopes. What happens after death? Are we alone? Does consciousness survive? Is there something beyond what we can see? And perhaps that persistence reveals something important, because even people who reject these answers continue asking questions. Maybe that is the real mystery. Not spirits, not reincarnation, not even death, but the strange fact that human beings seem incapable of accepting that existence is meaningless. We search, we question, we wonder. We reach toward answers that remain beyond our grasps. And perhaps that is why books like the Spirit book survive. Not because they eliminate mystery, but because they give mystery a shape. If Kardec was wrong, then generations of people devoted their lives to an illusion, a misunderstanding carried across centuries. But if the book was right, then humanity may never be alone, not for a single moment. The dead may still be here. The lives you've forgotten may still shape you, and the story you call your life may have begun long before you were born. Perhaps that is why certain questions never leave us, because somewhere deep inside us, we suspect there is more to our story than we can ever remember. The mystery remains. The file remains open. And whatever waits beyond death, it has been waiting for longer than you have.